You know, for decades, the relationship between India and Russia has been called this special, privileged, strategic partnership. It's a bond that was forged way back in the Cold War and honestly has been tested through thick and thin. But in today's world, things are shifting so fast, with new alliances and all these new pressures, so it brings up a really critical question. Can this historic friendship actually adapt, or is it just going to become a relic of the past? That's the big question we're going to unpack right now.
To really get how deep this relationship runs, just look at this number, 36%. That's the chunk of India's arms imports that still comes from Russia. This isn't just some historical fact, it's the bedrock of India's military today. It tells you that even with everything changing, these defense ties are still a very, very big deal.
All right, so here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the roots of this all-weather friendship. Then, we'll dive into the modern pillars holding it up. After that, we'll get into the tricky stuff, the new cracks in the foundation. We'll see how India is handling this huge balancing act, and finally, we'll look at the path forward.
So, let's start at the beginning, with that foundation. You hear this phrase thrown around a lot, all-weather friendship. But what does it really mean? Well, it's about a relationship that is just endured. It's provided consistent support through all kinds of geopolitical storms and shifting global winds.
You know, the heart of this friendship has always been political alignment. And we're not just talking about photo ops at summits. This is about real, tangible support on the world's biggest stages. I mean, take Russia's backing for India's permanent seat on the UN Security Council. That's a huge endorsement that, frankly, very few other major powers have offered so clearly for so long.
Okay, so with that history in mind, let's jump to today. What are the pillars that define this partnership right now, in the 21st century? What's really holding it all together?
So, while Russia is still the undisputed #1 supplier at 36%, the really fascinating part of this chart is the other 64%. That number tells a completely different story. It shows that India is actively diversifying, buying a lot more from countries like France, Israel, and the US. So, yeah, Russia's dominance is still there, but it's not absolute anymore.
And here's the crucial thing to get. The defense relationship itself is changing. It's moving way beyond just a simple buyer-seller thing. Think about the BrahMos cruise missile. That's a world-class weapons system that was developed jointly by India and Russia. This is about co-development, co-production. That's a much deeper level of trust and tech partnership, and it's all reinforced by regular joint military exercises.
Now, defense always grabs the headlines, right? But the economic story here is absolutely staggering. Almost $69 billion. That is a record high for their bilateral trade. It just goes to show this partnership is becoming about so much more than just military gear. In fact, they're aiming for $100 billion by 2030.
And just look at how broad this whole thing is. In energy, Russia is now India's #1 supplier of crude oil. That's a vital lifeline. In tech, they're a key partner in Gaganyaan, which is India's mission to put an astronaut in space. And in finance, they're settling 90% of their trade in their own currencies, a really clear signal that they're building a system outside of Western control. But, and this is a really big but, the ground underneath this partnership is shifting. For all its strengths, new geopolitical realities and economic problems are starting to test this old friendship in ways we've just never seen before. Hey, remember that huge trade number we just saw? Well, here's the catch. Look at this imbalance. India is buying almost $64 billion in stuff, mostly oil, from Russia, but it's only selling less than $5 billion back. That's not a balanced partnership. It's pretty much a one-way street. This got so lopsided that the Russian foreign minister himself actually admitted, and I'm quoting here, the surplus of rupees is a problem. So why is that? Well, because Russia now holds billions and billions of Indian rupees that it can't really spend anywhere else internationally, and that creates a major financial headache for them.
And this right here is maybe the greatest challenge of all. They're starting to look at the world in different ways. On one side, you have India getting closer and closer with the West through groups like the Quad. That's the partnership with the US, Japan, and Australia. On the other side, Russia has a no-limits partnership with China and is even doing military drills with Pakistan, India's main rival. These aren't just minor disagreements, they're fundamental shifts. So this creates a massive dilemma, right? How can a country stay close to both Washington and Moscow when they are so at odds with each other? And that brings us to what's being called India's Great Balancing Act.
So, the big question is, how on earth does India walk this geopolitical tightrope? How does it maintain these crucial relationships with countries that seem to be on opposite teams?
The answer, the real key to understanding all of this, is a core principle of Indian foreign policy: strategic autonomy. Basically, it means avoiding rigid alliances. Instead, you make decisions based on one thing, and one thing only: what is in India's national interest in that specific situation. It's a policy of being friends with many, but, well, beholden to none.
And if you want to see this in action, the Ukraine conflict is the perfect case study. India abstained on the UN resolution that condemned Russia, flat out refusing to side with the West. And at the exact same time, it dramatically ramped up its purchase of discounted Russian oil, putting its own energy security and economy first. This is strategic autonomy in its purest form, just a path guided solely by national interest.
So, given this really complex reality, what's the path forward? For this relationship to not just survive, but actually thrive, both countries have to actively adapt it for this completely new era we're in.
So what would a roadmap for the future even look like? Well, first, to fix that crazy trade imbalance, India has to boost its exports in areas like IT and pharma. Second, to keep the defense partnership relevant, they've got to move beyond just buying stuff and really co-develop next-gen tech. Third, to handle those diverging worldviews, they need to be constantly talking about China, about the US, and finally, they need to find new areas to work together in, like AI, cybersecurity, and even nuclear energy.
Which brings us right back to our central question. The India-Russia relationship is a legacy of the 20th century, and it's facing the very different challenges of the 21st. It has these deep historic roots and powerful modern pillars, but it's also facing some really serious strains. The ultimate test is going to be its ability to adapt. Can this time-tested friendship evolve for a new global era? The answer to that is going to define the strategic landscape for years to come.